Laird Hamilton once said, "If you don't understand the wave, you can't respect it. And if you don't have respect, it's only a matter of time before the ocean teaches you to get some." I find that often the same can be said about our work in the humanities. To properly respect a novel, a poem, or even an essay, it helps to have a basic understanding of the forms and structures, the work that it took to get a piece from genesis to a final presentation. In the dojo of writer's craft, there's no better place to learn this respect than composition. Most universities across the country require at least 2 semesters of basic English composition or writing. This is because these classes provide necessary skills and knowledge that every single person will take through the rest of their major. Learning to write is not just a practice reserved for writers and humanists. It's a fundamental tool for success. Professor Andrew Tolhurst knows an awful lot about respecting both waves and compositional structures. He's seen his fair share of wipeouts and rough drafts. He's a surfing enthusiast, a father of 2, prior high school teacher, and now a professor of English composition and writing. Today, we're going to dive into what English composition can teach us more broadly, and how a surfing mentality ties into it all. From Audacious Media and the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, you're listening to the Relevate podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Charles Wright. Let's begin, shall we? Professor Tolhurst, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
It's really nice of you to be here.
I appreciate it, man. Any chance I get to talk about the humanities in the English department, I will do so.
Wonderful. Okay, so my first question is that you are an alumni of this school twice over. You got your bachelor's here and your master's here, but you're originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So how long have you been in this area, and what originally brought you down here?
Well, I've been here a little over 30 years at this point, and what originally brought me here was, in fact, the university. I was a athlete when I was in high school, and there was a swim camp or maybe a training. I can't remember exactly, but the coach from UNCW was there to visit, and he said, "Hey, you should come take a look." I did, and that was about all it took. I was in love with the place from the start. I did look at some other schools, of course, but it was kind of always in my mind, like, that's where I'm going. Like, that's the place for me. And when I got here as an undergrad, I was here from 95 through 99, and then graduated, taught high school for 1 year, got the licensure here, so kind of 3 times over. And then, of course, eventually did my master's. But long story short, that's how I ended up here.
That's very cool. So you've been in the Wilmington area for a long time now. How have you seen the city change in that amount of time?
Oh man, so many ways. Both good and bad. Sheer growth, size is probably the most glaring change or obvious change. The thing that I noticed the most. For example, my wife and I and our kids, we live in the area of town known as Monkey Junction, which is south of the university by not that far, maybe 8-9 miles. At the time when I got here as an undergrad, that was like the edge of the earth. like you packed a lunch. Like, who knows what was going to happen if you went that far? Like, I don't know what's down there. Now, it's continuous all the way through, and I still have to pack a lunch because now the lights and the ride from there to campus is just as long and uncertain as to what might happen. But I think that's the biggest change. There's still elements of Wilmington, the small Wilmington that I knew that are around. But as it's changed, the sheer size and number of people is probably the biggest change.
One of my best friends lives in Los Angeles right now, and I joke with him often about how the traffic here is approaching LA levels. I live what should be maybe 7 minutes from campus, and sometimes it takes me 45 minutes to get home.
Yeah,
it's absurd.
Exactly. Yeah, 9 miles takes about 35 minutes. I can guarantee about a half hour of it. And everybody's always got their cut throughs, but as we increase with number of schools and number of buses, and it's a trick. There's really just no good way to do it. You got to sort of just sit and eat it.
Yeah, I agree. So I was wondering, what led you to pursue an English degree in the first place? What drew you to the humanities?
It's an interesting question because I had no idea that that's what I was going to do. When I came to school here, I think if you probably look up some of the old literature somewhere, I had declared as like environmental science. And then I was going to do bio and swim with the dolphins like everybody because it's UNCW. And I very quickly discovered that not so much, not for me. In high school, I had fairly good track record in my humanities classes. I was interested, I had good teachers, so it was always sort of an interest to me. And it was just kind of floating out there in the background. And as I was going through the sciences and realizing this probably just isn't going to work out for you, I made the decision, all right, well, I don't want to put these into nothing. So one last gasp, I spoke with my advisor and I did pre-med, which was a concentration, but you still had to declare a major. And at that time, and even now, especially now, a lot of the med schools wanted to see, like law schools wanted to see something other than just hard science. You were going to get plenty of that. Everybody's got it. What did you have that was different? So I said, all right, well, I've always had an interest in this and been someone successful. I'll do the English Lit. I'll do that. And so I declared that as my major. Needless to say, I did not pursue the MD. Yeah. Organic chemistry was kind of the end of that. But I did stay with the English and never regretted it for a second.
That's interesting. I know in a lot of my classes, I see a lot of like ex-bio majors, ex-chem majors, and they like, at a certain point, I just had to realize that I was way more interested in English than I was in organic biology or organic chemistry. It just wasn't for them. And I feel like sometimes those students, or at least maybe people looking outside, would see those students as a failure because it's like, oh, you didn't make it in the path that you originally set yourself out on. And it's like, well, no, you altered your path to do what would make you happy. And I think that that's really important because like now I would assume that you are happy in your career. And even though you're not a doctor.
No, right. No, you would have to drag me out of here, my dead and dying carcass. I'll never leave. I love this position. I love this job. Yeah, it was... I never felt like a failure. I probably, like a great number of our students, I felt like those sciences and that sort of original path plan was something that would lead to a career that I had identified, versus figuring out what my skill sets were and applying that to a career later. It was, it was sort of a pathway that led me there. And then when I given the opportunity to think about it and really evaluate like what I found important and what I found engaging, made the change.
That's something that I've talked to a number of people about, is that especially right now with our current like battle of relevance that we're facing in the humanities and college being seen as a career maker, like you're supposed to go into college knowing what you're going to major in and how that is going to directly translate into a career. And that's why we are having a problem getting people to enroll in English programs, because the only thing that people know that you can do with an English degree is to teach English. It's like, oh, well, I'm either going to become a novelist or I'm going to teach English at a high school or college level. And right. I think that like that perception, it's so wrong. And that's sort of what I'm trying to do here on this podcast, is to get people to say like, there's so many more things that you can do with an English degree. There's so much other research you can do, so many other career paths. It's so multifaceted and so open-ended at the end of the career. Like you are setting yourself up for a lot of success by getting an English degree. And a lot of people don't have that perception. And I think that that's really sort of, it's a blind spot in the culture, which is something that I'm hoping to correct.
Yeah, I'm glad to be doing it too, because I think it is on us to do it too. We've kind of enabled that to some degree. Of course, we resisted as much as possible, but at times, like there wasn't a big bunch of pushback from us. And I think those of us in the humanities now realize, like, no, this is more relevant than ever. And the antithesis is always true every time we do this. Like, oh, it limits you. No, it's actually limitless for you, right? And you can play around with all of those, but that's really what I've found to be true, is that it's not limiting in that fashion. In fact, your odds are exponentially better because of it.
Yeah. So you mostly teach English 101 and 201 here at the university, which are like the Intro to English Comp or Intro to College Writing. These are often a student's first encounter with college-level writing or literature. How do you sort of try to instill a sense of the importance of English and writing when you're teaching these classes, especially to students who, a lot of the students are just there to fulfill the obligation?
I think I try to, as much as possible, be genuine. I think when the class sees that a person has a genuine passion for the subject that they're in, that translates. So, I think that's part of it. But in terms of convincing them, I try to point out that this is essential. It's not something that you're doing to just survive it, but you're doing it because you need it to survive, right? This is In the university system, particularly in ours, it's one of the best opportunities to do presumably what they're there for, and that's a liberal arts degree, right? You have all these different majors in a room, all these different lenses from which to view social conversations or the piece of lit or whatever it is that you built your class around. This is that opportunity, right? This is the idea of the liberal arts degree that they're here to seek, and frequently face-to-face, though online as well, that truth still doesn't change. I looked this up, and there's an essay I teach, usually in 101, not every time because it bores me, but William Zinsser's College Pressures. And he writes about this very issue, and it's back in 1976. And I usually withhold the date, and we go through the essay, and we teach everything. And by the time we get to the end, I'm like, is this still relevant to you guys? Is this true? And they're like, yeah, it's still true. I'm like, yeah, well, it's from 1976. And he says, there will be plenty of time to change jobs, change careers, change whole attitudes and approaches. But they, the undergrad, don't want to hear this. They don't want to hear such liberating news. They want a map right now that they can follow unswervingly to career security, financial security, social security, and presumably a prepaid grave, right? He calls them a driven creature that's ignoring their blithe spirit underneath. And that's kind of what I try to get them to open to. Like, look, this is your opportunity to do this. Yeah, it's a requirement, but it's a requirement because that's the liberal arts degree that you're pursuing. You need this cross-curricular study. You need this opportunity to think creatively and critically, and then, take those skills and apply them, right? No, it doesn't translate maybe perhaps to a direct field result, but the skills will, So that's kind of how I try to approach it. This is that essential piece of the liberal arts university degree that you're paying to be here for. You can, sometimes the sales pitch works and sometimes it doesn't, but it's their money ultimately. If they are going to cruise through class, then. But I think more often than not, being genuine and just trying to speak to how essential this actually really is to what you're purporting to engage in, that usually works. They usually come along. Good joke here and there. It doesn't hurt.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think that's brilliant. I think it's that intangibility of the final result that scares a lot of people because it doesn't point to a direct career. But I think that's a really beautiful way to put that. There's an article that is from an Inside Higher Ed issue titled Virtuous Arguments, and it's by Dr. John Duffy. And he proposes that college writing courses like Intro to College Writing or English 101 represent, and I'll quote here, one of the few places in the academic curriculum where students learn the basics of an argument, how to provide evidence, and how to consider the alternative points of view. He argues that it is within these college writing courses that we can, as a society, cultivate a greater capacity for compassion and help improve the state of our country's public discourse. And again, this is an article that was written back in, I think it was in 2012, and he was talking about how terrible the public discourse was at that time. And right. I feel that 10 years later, it has only gotten worse.
It's a growing dumpster fire.
Yeah, it's definitely not better, maybe the same, possibly worse. And I was wondering, as someone who teaches the very courses that Dr. Duffy was talking about, how do you encourage personal and professional growth in the classroom for your students?
I think it's my task and my efforts go towards trying to get them to find, kind of like we were just talking about, find the skill set, right? Identify those things that for other purposes transfer, and then get them to find purposeful ways to use it. Not so much as, maybe the study of any one particular essay or any particular one idea, but rather this is the kind of thing that if you are willing to think a little bit creatively and be challenged a little bit in terms of a direct line of sight to success, right? You might not have that. It might feel a little murky, but I think it's the thing that will engender skills that translate later. Like you're going to be able to then work your way through a difficult situation, a difficult, whatever your TPS report that your boss gave you. You'll be able to manipulate and manage these things, if only because you've tried it once before and now you have some idea of how to succeed, hopefully some of the skill set too. But that these are the courses and these are the skills that, are going to be the thing that'll kind of set you up for your own best efforts and success. That, what I love about the humanities is that there's plenty of people that are going to be full of all kinds of great hard science, right? But not everybody can manipulate some of the things that our course asks of them. And I guess that's not so. They can, but maybe that's not as a concern. But when you make it a concern, most all the students that I've had that come back and talk to me, or if we've had the chance to chat, they all say, like, that was the thing that's really helped me excel the most, right? It got me into this research facility with medicine. It got me through law school. It got me into such and such trading corporation. Like, it's those skills in that class, I think, uniquely, that offer them the best chance to differentiate and help themselves in the future.
Speaking to Duffy's point, do you feel that your work in college writing is actually helping promote a more civil public discourse? Do you think do you think it's making a difference?
Ideally, I hope so. I think it's hard because the only voices we hear now are not so civil. Mm-hmm. And these people that are coming up through the university now have not had a chance, to cast their voice. So time will tell, I guess. And if we've done our job well, then they will. I feel like they do, at least for the time that I get to interact with them and see them through, the courses and then their time here on campus. I think they're aware. They're much more aware of what the discourse sounds like and how to do that civilly, right? I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. I hope so. Fingers are crossed.
I mentioned at the top that you're a surfer at heart. How do you bring surfing philosophy into the way that you teach composition?
It's funny you asked that. I wrote an essay about how surfing sort of influenced me in teaching in general. And I think it's, all the tropes and cliches and metaphors that you would make are actually true, right? Like, you have to be very present to be successful at surfing. If you're worried about this or thinking about that, the wave, the energy doesn't stop moving and you're trying to stay within it. So there's that. You have to be very fluid and willing to change plans when things go awry, or if things go badly, you have either the skill or the talent to hang on until they go right side up again, and they will. It's all those usual little tropes that you would imagine. I think those are very true in teaching, especially if you're going to stay with it. It's something that is always changing. Every year there's always something. So if you sort of adopt that approach and just kind of roll with it, I think I think it works rather well. It's not to say there's never a plan, right? Even when you go surfing, you have a plan of what you'd like to do, and then sometimes it works out that way, sometimes not so much. But that ability to sort of stay present and be engaged and look for what's coming, those things translate for teaching for sure, and probably a great number of things.
Well, yeah, the waves often have their own plan.
Yeah. So do the semesters.
Yeah, exactly. You taught high school before you worked here at UNCW. How does working with high school students differ from teaching university students?
Well, honestly, for a number of students that I see, it's not that much different, because one summer removed, right? If they're a freshman, they're really just a summer older senior. And those were the classes I generally taught, juniors and seniors, when I taught high school. That was where my strength was. So it's not always all that different, but as you get higher, right, you get juniors and seniors in some of the other courses, the 290s and whatnot, then that's different because they have a different life experience. And what I really like about it is that there is that added depth to the classroom that's not always present in a high school classroom, because you just don't have that range of people. I like it because generally my hands aren't tied as to what we want to talk about or where we want to go. And that's not always like, oh, you can't say this or shouldn't say that, but just if funding is tied to testing and your testing scores then you have to direct the class in that sort of fashion. My oldest daughter goes to public high school now, and she's going through some of that in her English classes. She's like, oh, we only just read questions or read. Well, part of me understands why. It's a shame. I wish it didn't have to be that way. So I love that. I love the freedom to do the things that are creative and new and interesting and build classes around those. I like the ownership of the education that's then at this point, ideally, on them, because they realize no, I actually don't have to do this, right? I'm here of my own volition and my own goals. I'm not just here because the state says I have to be. So there's that too. And sometimes it's, they're here in the chorus maybe because they have to be. But again, if you do the work, I think you can give them a reason to be, is beyond just surviving. I really like the university student too in terms of their interpersonal engagement, right? You have a fair amount of distance between you and your high school class, as would necessitate, right? I'm probably 3 times their age. And while I'm significantly older than the students in my class now, sometimes, they've had a bit of added life experience to the point where there's more, I feel like, for me, connection points that I can make with them in sort of a humanist response that keeps me enthralled, right? That keeps me engaged and entertained.
When you teach for over a decade or close to 2 decades, you have to keep yourself interested too.
Yeah. You can only go through The Great Gatsby so many times.
Sure.
There's got to be something else.
What do you think that the biggest misunderstanding about the study of the humanities is?
I think kind of like the idea that we were talking about earlier, that it's somehow limiting, right? And that's actually not so. It's limitless. And anybody who you'll speak to, I'm sure, will have countless examples of people that have used their humanities in engaging ways. Like, for example, one of the MFA poets from UNCW is a head of tech writing, I believe, and possibly coding at Encino, right? And that creative crossover, she had the hobby and to be interested in that in the first place, but that creative thinking, that creative crossover, no doubt helped her to land in the position that she's in. I had a student email me at the start of the semester who's now in her last year of med school saying, thank you so much for this because, it's crossed over in this way and I've seen it help me in this way. I think people think of it as something that, we're just chasing metaphors and similes and hidden meanings in literature. And it's not that. Our faculty is amazing in that way, from the research projects that they engage with, right? Like from Dr. Gilbert's 1898 research project through to any of the work that Dr. Terrell is always fascinating me, like whatever he's into, I'm into. That kind of acute, creative, critical research is the the essence of things, right? If that's the job of the humanities, is to ask why and to ask questions of. Yeah, occasionally we hunt down a metaphor and some symbolism, but it's also all these other things, and when people don't do that. Or don't value it, I think we kind of end up in some of what we're in now.
So what does give you hope right now for the future of the humanities?
The colleagues that I work with and the students that are always pushing for ways to make it relevant, for ways to make it, and not that they're demanding of it or defending it, but constantly reinventing it and in such a way then making that useful. Not out of any need of justification, but because it needs to be done, right? It's the important work that should happen. Seeing their projects and seeing their ideas and then seeing their successes, and same thing with the students, that gives me hope for the humanities, that the more we celebrate and see those successes, the more promising I think the future looks. I refuse to believe in the death of the humanities. It's not. It would be a sad day indeed if it were. So I think just the university itself and the people that are here either on one side of the desk or the other are the thing that give me hope.
That's great. That's wonderful. Thank you for being here. As always, my last question is, what's the best book that you've read recently?
Carlos Luis Zafran's The Angel's Game. That was the best book I've read most recently. It was really good. Spanish Gothic story about a writer who is haunted by his choices and his need to write. It's a good book.
That sounds really interesting. Professor Tolhurst, thank you for coming on the show. Really
Thanks for having me. My pleasure, man. My pleasure.
Relevate is produced each week by Audacious Media and the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. Today's episode was hosted, produced, and edited by myself, Dana Charles Wright, and executive produced by Dr. Megan Sweeney. Special thanks to Randall Library and the excellent people at the Digital Makerspace for lending us their studio. If you have a project, a paper, or a topic that you'd like to discuss on the podcast, and you're a faculty member or a student of an accredited college or university, please send us an email at relevatepod@gmail.com. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.